This week on the Backtable podcast.
In terms of the quality of people who come through, people who sign up, people who raise their hands and join, I think it's so important, and it makes it such a great group, I think, as we look going forward. And so I think as I step back and just kind of look at it all, I'm like I said, super grateful for the time, regardless of pendulum swinging one way or another, and realizing just like everything else in life, your Navy time is what you make of it. Opportunities are everywhere, but you always got to grab them, and nothing is given, everything is earned. That's life in general. And I think the most successful people in life, it's the same exact thing. And the military just provides a way for some of this to come in a faster sort of way.
My name is Gopi Shah. I'm a pediatric ENT, and I have two guests today, also fellow pediatric ENT. So, I love my pediatric ENT guests. We have Dr. Matthew Brigger. He is the Division Chief of Pediatric Otolaryngology and the Medical Director of the Aerodigestive Program at Rady Children's Hospital in San Diego, and is a professor of otolaryngology at the University of California, San Diego School of Medicine. We also have Commander Philip Gaudreau. He's a Residency Program Director of Navy Otolaryngology, Specialty Leader, and Associate Professor of Surgery at the Uniformed Services University, and a Pediatric Otolaryngologist practicing at Naval Medical Center, San Diego. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for coming on. Before we get into it, can you tell us a little bit about yourselves and your practices?
So my practice is really something that has evolved over time. So I actually, in my transition to civilian practice, gave me the ability to really hone down a practice to what is really an airway and swallowing practice. And so we've built our aerodigestive program, which is called the Center for Pediatric Aerodigestive Disorders and Airway Surgery, of which I head, which is basically has led to this tertiary, almost quaternary level of care, where essentially what I do is provide surgical care for both airway and swallowing.
So my practice is a lot different. So we only have two pediatric ENTs in the Navy, one on the East Coast and me on the West Coast. So my practice is very diverse. I basically do everything that kind of walks in the door, and do some adults too, because we cover the whole hospital. So we cover adults on call and things like that. But my practice gets to be kind of whatever I want to make it, which has been kind of really nice. So I get to do some adult skull-based stuff because I've had experience with that in kids, and then I get to do cochlear implants, and I end up being kind of the backup for everybody when we are gapped for other specialists because my experience has been so diverse. So it's been really great because I can kind of mold it into whatever I want.
That's awesome. And do you come to Rady sometimes too?
I do.
Yeah. That's awesome. Okay. Well, I'm super excited for our podcast today. I really want to get a better understanding of, when a person does pursue a medical career in the military and, sort of how that shaped your perspectives and your practices in pediatric otolaryngology. So just to kind of set the stage, at what stage in your education did you join the military?
So I started pretty early, almost as early as you can, because I did ROTC for undergrad. So the Navy paid for my undergrad. And then when I was deciding to go to medical school, because I didn't actually decide to go to medical school until like my junior year in college. And when I was deciding it, I basically had two options, was to go to the Uniformed Services University, which is like the military medical school that's in Bethesda, Maryland, or you could go to a civilian school and then get the Navy to pay for it. And I ended up going to the Uniformed Services University because you are on active duty the whole time you're in medical school. So you're commissioned as an officer when you finish ROTC, stay active duty during medical school. So you get paid an active duty salary, which is kind of nice. And obviously no tuition or anything like that. The caveat to getting the Navy to pay for all that training is that it adds additional time to what you owe to the military at the end of all the training.
And what about you, Matt?
So I came at it a little bit of a different way. And so I joined while I was an undergrad. So essentially what happened is I knew I was going to go to medical school. If you would ask me when I was in sixth grade what I was going to do, I was going to be a doctor. So I knew that all along. I went this via becoming a mechanical engineer along the way, which is what I did for undergrad, which that's kind of its own little diversion. But ultimately what I actually signed up during, it was when I initially signed up was in my junior year of college, was when I started really kind of thinking about that once I got accepted to medical school. And really for me, there was some strong family ties to the Navy. and the Marine Corps, which influenced a little bit, but it was ultimately as I started looking into the options and getting to know some of my friends who had been doing ROTC, and I realized that it was something that I really wanted to do. And it actually just turned out to be a nice way to sort of pave the way to be able to pay for an education and be able as I move forward, but then also having another sense of purpose.
Yeah. And did you also do a civilian medical school or?
Yeah. So the way that it works for the program that I came in is something called the HPSP program. And it's the Health Profession Scholarship Program. And this is a way where the Navy pays for you to go to civilian medical school. So I went to the University of Cincinnati. I was actually commissioned as an officer right before starting medical school. But unlike Phil, I did not receive active duty pay. I received a stipend is how it worked. They did pay for medical school. They paid for that along the way. And then what I did was that every year I had 2 weeks where I would go spend some time doing Navy sort of things. And so it was a great experience along the way to be able to get to understand.
Is the application process for medical school when you are part of the military, how is that different or nuanced, whether it's for the Uniform Medical Services School or whether it's for the civilian medical schools?
So for me, because I was in ROTC already, it's not kind of well advertised that medical school is an option. And that's part of the reason why I was kind of going to join the Navy. And I thought I was a biochemistry major, so I thought that I would finish, go drive a ship for a few years and then come back and go to grad school or something like that. And then I found out that someone in the class ahead of me in school was going to medical school. And I was like, oh, I didn't even know that was an option for us. So I started kind of asking about it. What I had to do was apply for the Navy to then let me apply to medical school. So there was like a kind of a pre-screening process to make sure that they selected competitive applicants. Once that was approved, then I had to work with a separate medical recruiter that kind of has figured out where I was applying to civilian schools and the military school, and then kind of figuring out where you got accepted and how all that was going to work out.
One medical school through the Navy.
Correct, yeah. It's actually all tri-service. So it's the Navy, the Air Force, the Army, and they also now just recently started having Coast Guard students as well, and public health. The public health service has a couple of students in each class as well, but also all services at the one school, and that's the only one in the country. Each class is around 160, so it's like 60 Army and then like 50 Air Force, 50 Army, with those like one or two of each of the others.
And Matt, did you apply or did you know that you wanted to stick with a civilian medical school, or did you also look into the armed services one?
Yeah, so for me, I didn't even know about the Armed Forces Medical School at that time. And sort of as it came through, it's kind of one of those things where, it's funny how recruiting materials actually make you think. And it showed up I remember the day it showed up in my mailbox. And I remember looking up I should really think about this. And that's when I talked to my ROTC friends. I have to say, I didn't know about USUS, the military school. And I was sort of focused at that point going through the rounds of civilian medical schools. And I was already on the way on that path. So one of the things that was really interesting about that, though, so it doesn't really change anything about your application process. Yeah. They don't know that you're applying for it, and there's no real knowledge of it. But I knew that that would be how it would be funded and be paid for, which was interesting because it does take out a little bit of the sort of thought process as far as trying to stratify different places where you may or may not go. And so it was kind of nice that I knew I had the freedom to really go wherever I wanted to go.
That's cool. Do people join during residency? Is that as common, or post-training? Do you have colleagues?
It's not as common, but you definitely can. And there are certainly incentives like loan payback programs and things like that people can do if they decide to join after the fact. And that's one of the things actually that the Navy is trying to work hard to get people to consider the Navy as a career after they've finished training, because it, allows them to get someone who, if you select someone who's in ROTC and you're sending them to medical school and residency and fellowship, right, you're not going to have a finished person that can actually provide care for 10 to 12 years. So the investment is a lot easier if I can get someone who's already finished training that can just show up and get to work, so to speak. But there are definitely ways, and there's different pathways that people can take. And there's actually a couple of different programs that you can use, if you decide in medical school that you want to join. And I don't know of any ways or people that typically join during residency, but it's usually after you finish residency, you can then apply to get things paid back and those types of things.
In terms of a civilian or a military medical education, what are some of the differences? Like, is there more like field training? And what are the kind of differences in the different pathways that you guys took? Because you had like a separate several weeks in between that would come a long way. And it sounds like for you, you were active duty throughout.
Yeah. So for me, it was like as part of the sort of civilian medical school, I went through civilian medical school like anyone else did. I did before starting medical school, I actually spent 6 weeks, it's kind of like learn how to be in the Navy, be a Navy officer, sort of light is probably is what I'd say. So it's boot camp light, you might say. And, we spent some time where we really got to understand sort of some Navy history, how to wear a uniform, how to march, how to do things that, military things that everybody in the military needs to know how to do. And then from there, then I would just went to school, and then I'd have to I'd have a few weeks each year. And actually what I'd do is I'd rotate in various military hospitals. So that was sort of my exposure. So up until the point where I graduated from medical school, I had essentially a civilian education with a taste here and there of some hospital time.
So at the Uniformed Services University, there's definitely a lot more because we're wearing uniforms every day to class. And then when we're rotating at hospitals, it's at the military hospitals kind of all over the country, which is kind of a unique experience too. So, I was in Bethesda, but I was able to come out here to San Diego and rotate a couple times on both like the pediatric service and the ENT service. I had classmates who rotated at Tripler in Hawaii. And so it's kind of a unique experience to do that. And then we did have a series of field exercises as well that were both at a kind of reserve Army base in Pennsylvania, where we would basically go out there and spend a couple of weeks in the field. The first one was after our first year, and you spend half of the time kind of learning. It's kind of Army focused because there's the majority of the students there are Army. So it's kind of like in an Army environment. And at that time, we were in the middle of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. And so that was very obviously like land-based kind of Army-centric combat, scenarios. So you spend a couple of weeks on the field the first time. And then during our fourth year, we have this kind of culminating exercise called Operation Bushmaster, where we go out, and they still do this every year now. You go out and you spend 2 weeks in the field. And during that time, it's like a mock combat, and you are running an aid station, basically. And so they have some of the students who are coming in, the first-year students who get like moulaged up as casualties, and they have ambulances and helicopters and everything, and you're transporting casualties like back from the field. And I've actually had the opportunity to go back and be faculty for that a few times as well, which is really a cool experience because you're kind of just watching the way that these teams kind of come together. Because in the beginning, it's like total mess. Like they have no idea how to move patients, and the like controlling the chaos in those scenarios can be kind of really challenging. But then you kind of watch these teams grow throughout the time that you're there. And it's really a pretty cool experience.
Yeah, I would imagine the ability to kind of communicate, scan a situation, think on your feet, work with each other in a setting like that. I mean, it's
and it's organizing all the different jobs that people have and how you can kind of coordinate that and who has to be in charge. And because everybody rotates through different positions. You have like someone who's in charge of the aid station, who's like the commanding officer. And then you have like the senior medical officer who's responsible for kind of overseeing the medical care, and then an ambulance team leader that's responsible for going out and getting casualties, and then like people that are on the radio, and so coordinating all of that and supervising and trying to provide feedback as a faculty member to people doing those different jobs is really interesting.
That's cool. Just kind of going back a little bit to more of your personal experiences. I know you had mentioned you had some family ties to the military. You had some friends at a younger age in high school who were part of ROTC that introduced you. Were those some of the main reasons why you joined, or are there other reasons that were strong for you to choose this pathway?
Yeah, so for me, certainly there was the family ties of having my grandfather served in World War II, and we was sort of regaled by his stories all growing up. I had my uncles that were in the Marine Corps, but it really so that was sort of one piece to it. There was the piece of some of my close friends were ROTC during undergrad, but then there was also sort of like as I started looking forward to sort of life, like there is a sort of sense of purpose that goes along with that. And I think that was one of the things for me. And it was so interesting. So for me, with, I was actually in Bethesda as my first year in training, basically as a general surgery intern at the time, and when 9/11 occurred. And it was so interesting because to be part of it at that point And that was really kind of, I mean, at that point, I really was just finally tasting Navy because I would have these little tastes during medical school, but now I was wearing a uniform every day. And to be sort of that soon where I graduated medical school in May of 2001, I arrived in July of 2001, and really to be sort of thrown head in, it really sort of helped sort of solidify, wow, this is, I really want to be part of this. And we saw such a, influx of people coming in after 9/11. But it really kind of helped bring it through. But it was very much sort of the sense of purpose, I think, that I knew was part of what I wanted in life.
Yeah, so I have some Navy ties in my family as well. Same thing, my grandparents, and I have a couple of uncles that had been in the Navy in Vietnam and things like that. And so the military hadn't really been on my radar too strongly. I had gotten, actually during high school, I had gone to West Point for like a kind of weekend kind of experience where you got to kind of see what it was like at West Point. And I had my best friend from high school actually ended up going to the Coast Guard Academy. And when my first year of college, I hadn't done ROTC my first year. I just went to college, and then I had gone to visit my friend at the Coast Guard Academy and kind of just saw what he was doing and kind of, thought more about how I would like to be kind of a part of something bigger, like Matt was saying, that, that sense of purpose and sense of, wanting to serve and do a little bit more. And so I found out that there was a 3-year ROTC scholarship that they offered that I was able to apply for, and then kind of, and decided to do the Navy because of my family ties at that point. And looking at kind of, where the Navy has its bases and where you're potentially to be stationed, it's a little bit more favorable to be here in San Diego than some of the other places that the Army might send you.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
We love our Army colleagues, but sometimes they end up in rough places.
Yeah. That was going to be a next question of how do you choose which branch? But it sounds like family ties and then...
Location probably does play a role into it.
Yeah. I think that there's, everybody has their own reasons. I think a lot of people have, family ties. And then for some people, the idea of like spending any time on a ship is probably not great and those types of things. So they may decide to pursue another service. But the one thing that's nice about the medical community too is that we know our ENT colleagues across the services and work with them on many different projects. And so you really get to know those folks really well. And the other thing that's kind of interesting about going to the Uniformed Services University is so each specialty at each service has either what's called a consultant or a specialty leader. And so I'm the specialty leader for Navy ENT, and 2 of my med school classmates are the Army and Air Force consultants to the Surgeon General. So we get to interact and talk all the time still, however many years later. So
that's great. So now, you've gone through medical school, you did the civilian medical education, you're still in the Uniformed Services University, and now it's time, you want to do ENT, and it's time to apply for a residency. How does that work?
Good question.
That's a good question.
So one of the things that I think is nice about military training too is that the pool of applicants is a lot smaller. So now as a program director, and Matt was a prior program director.
By way of sort of discussing this, so essentially I was in Phil's role for basically, I preceded him by 6 years. And then, so I did that role, I served in the role, and then when I left, he took over my spot as far as being the one of 2 pediatric otolaryngologists in the Navy. So moved on, and I was running the residency.
I see.
Then now he has taken over the residency. So it's a great sort of, basically, we've got this great lineage sort of going here in San Diego that have the nice connections.
So when medical students decide that they want to do ENT, a lot of times, especially in their 4th year, they're able to rotate at, and spend kind of month-long rotations at each of the military hospitals. So we have 3 residency programs in the Navy in ENT, one here in San Diego, one in Portsmouth in Virginia, which is actually where I trained, and then another one at Walter Reed in Bethesda, Maryland. And that one is tri-service, so there's Army, Air Force, and Navy folks at that program. So a lot of times the students will rotate and spend a whole month with us, which is great because you really get to know them pretty well. Sometimes the civilians are only able to pick, people who are doing the HPSP scholarship are only able to pick one because they can't get everything kind of funded to travel, which is understandable. But we're able to kind of get to know them pretty well in the application process. And the applicant pool is much smaller. So we have 5 spots per year in the Navy, 2 in San Diego, 2 in Virginia, and then 1 in Bethesda. And so we'll get, 10 to 12 applicants for those spots, and they still are competitive, but it gives folks an opportunity that maybe would have less likelihood of matching on the civilian side, the opportunity to still be in a competitive specialty like ENT. And then the match happens much sooner. So once we've kind of done the whole interview and process, we have a selection board that typically meets in November every year. So all the program directors and the specialty leaders, and then some senior leaders like our admiral, who's a Corps Chief of Navy Medicine, will be in this room, and we kind of present what we think how people should match to different locations. And then those results come out in mid-December, typically every year.
So do you have some students then who apply in the residency match ERAS from that who may have not matched, or is that difficult then to transition? Because
so they
December,
can.
It's kind of late.
Yeah,
too.
It is late. So there is sometimes an option, and that's one of the things we did have an option this year. So the Navy every year will decide how many people they need, to match in each individual specialty. And if it's more than 5 in ENT, for instance, then they'll offer some civilian spots. And so people do have the option. So we had 2 of those this year. So we did have the option for people to then put in an application into ERAS.
So double apply.
Correct. Double apply, because you don't know what's going to happen in the military match, but then at least you've got all your application stuff in. So that, as a specialty leader, that's another thing that I oversee. And so I was able to kind of reach out to those students and say, hey, we've got these spots. Make sure you also apply in ERAS so that you get, maximize your opportunities for the following year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is kind of an interesting, because because it is small, there is a small numbers game that goes on. Yeah. And so, which can be very favorable. And generally it's I always knew, when we were doing residency selection, we knew these people so well, versus now doing it on the other side. So in the civilian side, even just trying to decide who to interview is we can't, and particularly as we're doing all these different things with using test scores and trying to understand, we're going off these giant applications, and you can imagine what the applications look like these days. And I'd say the civilian match becomes almost impersonal thing to try to figure out who we're even going to interview. And then even the interviews, that's the only time you really get to know these, except for the handful that have rotated, versus it was so different and foreign for me when I initially came out, because I knew these students, and so it's so funny for me, because now these are the students who rotated with me, who I selected and trained as residents, are in the Navy, have served their time, or now have kind of moved on to other various leadership positions and are here in town working as civilians, and it's kind of a fun sort of thing. But I've known them so well from the day they were medical students, where I think it's much harder in the civilian side.
What kind of, I think of medical students coming for advice for residency application. What kind of advice were you getting, and how is that maybe different from your classmates also applying in ENT who may have not been part of the military? I don't know. I think it's a unique group, and for somebody that doesn't have experience, I don't know if I would really know how to properly advise or what to think about. You know what I mean?
Well, that is one of the problems, though, just because of the sort of the numbers at any given institution. There's probably a handful of people on an HPSP scholarship, maybe, or maybe 1, maybe 2. So you're kind of a little bit flying alone. It was definitely, and that was one of the things, I think one of the tough parts when you're training when you're in a military, the system, but you're training outside in the civilian, that disconnect can be hard to manage. And so what's important to know is there are people out there who want to help, but it does take a little bit of your own sort of self to be able to seek it out. And so, because I learned very early on, I would say that not all of us are able to sort of jump in, and everything the recruiter says is not exactly how things line up, and is trying to understand the programs, which can be very difficult. But I think some of the things from a way that, as far as counseling goes, there's sort of the counseling that goes before you join. And oftentimes what I'll say when people ask me about it, I'm like, there are many ways to have medical school paid for. The military is one, but I would say that would not be a reason to join. Don't join the military just because you're trying to get medical school paid for, because it's so much more and it's so much bigger, and there's so much more to offer from it. But it also, there's certain inherent costs of, being that you could be even caught into the small number sort of game. Because one problem that really comes out of this is, take those 5 people who didn't match, right? They've got to do something. They have to do something. They're in the military. It's not like in the civilian where it was, hey, I'm going to go do a research year and reapply next year. They have to do something. And so then it's whether they get shunted to another specialty, whether they serve as a general medical officer. There are a variety of different things, but you have to be working in the military in some way, shape, or form. So that's part of the counseling that I often give. And so, like everything in life, the military, there's a combination of timing, who you know, who you are, and all those things that kind of play into it. And for my career, it has been wonderful. Everything is lined up perfectly. I couldn't draw it better, like when it came through my military time. But I certainly have friends who ran into some struggles. And I've actually mentored people who, unfortunately, were stellar candidates. It just happened to be that year there were other stellar candidates. And so it's sort of a balancing act, I think, that comes through it. And so, like I say, when I counsel people, I talk about these various different aspects to it, but always realize that you are in the military. You hate to even use the term, but you're a military asset, and you will be used as a military asset regardless. And that is what we all sign at the very beginning. We all sign. You're sort of signing, that a period of time to the United States government.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's the Navy is trying to provide more pathways. So it's certainly, it's very common that, in order to do a competitive specialty like ENT, you used to have to do a general surgery internship, which is kind of what Matt and I did, and then go serve as a general medical officer for a few years because the way the system works is you accrue points based on the different jobs that you have in the military. So you'd go serve as a general medical officer and then apply to come back to residency later. So the Army and the Air Force have always kind of done it differently, where you could go straight into training. In the Navy now, we are doing it straight through to training too. So the general medical officer tours tend to happen after training, where a lot of times it's primary care folks and stuff that are better suited to serve in those types of jobs. But they're providing opportunities for folks. So if you say don't match an ENT and you end up doing a transitional year or a general surgery year, you can apply again after internship, but you're going to have to repeat that whole intern year. Or you can spend time and go out and do a general medical officer tour and then apply to come back. And a lot of people, have really been grateful for the time that they've had to go out and do general medical officer tours. That's when you get to do all the fun things in the Navy, right? So my friends who were flight surgeons who got to fly in F-18s or, spend time with the Marines and they're, in Japan or, so those types of cool opportunities, that's a lot of times when those things can happen. So if you are either not ready to start residency or didn't match the first time, there are certainly ways to kind of get back, but it does involve, like Matt was saying, some time kind of doing other jobs in the Navy first.
But I will make a kind of a caveat, sort of a pull to that, as Phil alluded to. People think, the time when you're a general medical officer, young, you have the ability to do these sorts of things. And, the reality is when I look back at my career, I spent some time with the Marines. And really, honestly, my time with the Marine Corps completely changed my entire view on the military. And I had as I went through internship, it was a little bit, it's just the hospital system's just a little different, being inside versus being out on the line and really understanding, how wars are fought and what the war fighters do and what they also sacrifice. And I always say my time with the Marines is really what drove me to actually stay within the Navy and keep working in the Navy, keep my close ties that I have to it. They're truly amazing people. And during my training was during the time, so I was essentially, like I mentioned, I did my general surgery year, was in 2001 hit, right? So then I spent time with the Marines as everyone was gearing up and headed to Afghanistan. And my role was actually getting the trainees ready to go. And it was really just amazing to see the passion, to see the commitment, and to really understand what it means to serve your country. And if you would have asked me when I had just finished my general surgery internship, I was actually planning to get out of the military. I was planning to go train as a civilian, just pay my GMO time and get out. It changed the course of my entire career based on that, because I realized there's something much more than medicine. There's something much more what we do. And to this day, it's I really do always look at my time, and we call it green side, blue side, whether the Marine Corps or you're the surface Navy. And it really I would never trade that time for that has molded my future without question.
So that perspective, that lens that you gained when you have all these pretty significant experiences, potential for whether it's life-endangering missions to, prepping other people for these. How does that lens shape how you practice on your day-to-day?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
How does that shape that 30-patient clinic?
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting because especially in a specialty like ours, right, when you're doing pediatric ENT, right? So I'm not, except for my call patients and the occasional adults that kind of trickle into my clinic, the vast majority of what I'm doing is taking care of kids. And the kids of all these, active duty folks. And I find that it becomes very easy to kind of bend over backwards to help take care of them, So in my clinic last week, I have right now, like everybody, my schedule is crazy. I'm backed up months for surgeries and things like that. But I have somebody last week who comes in and I'm like, okay, well, we're probably looking at, May, June for surgery. And the guy's like, I'm deploying in March. Can we do this earlier? So I'm like, hang on, call my scheduler. Like, can we find OR time anywhere? Like, let's make this happen. And so it becomes like, it's never a question of like, oh, I was supposed to go do something else that day or whatever. Like, it's just like, yeah, absolutely. Like, we're going to make it work and I'm going to fix this for you, because I can't imagine how stressful it would be to be deployed. You're on a ship somewhere in the middle of the Pacific and know that your kid's getting surgery back there and you can't be there to help them. Like, that level of stress, I can't imagine. And so it makes it very easy to, when you see what these people go through and the commitment that they have, like Matt said, to kind of serve their country and do the mission, to take care of their kids, becomes very like, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that they're, able to be comfortable in that scenario.
And I would echo that, because I think that ethos that sort of comes through has carried through to my civilian practice. And, sometimes I have a hard time understanding, when other people within our group, within our system, hey, it's nope, we're not able to do this. That's time to go. Sorry, you're late. We're not going to see you. Like, I really can't do it. And the joke is I'm always on call. And it's like, when I'm not on call, I'm still on call. And it's like, because I really feel it, and it's this deep commitment that I think that sort of comes through and it bleeds through over time. And yeah, it's just trying to, you put yourself in, I think, other people's shoes. And I think having that time with just seeing the the people who were fighting the wars, taking care of their kids, it's like I apply it sort of across the board now.
So, Phil, you are still in the military doing a military practice, and that you had a large military practice and then transitioned to civilian. Can you first talk to me, Phil, about what your practice is like, or both of you, in terms of what are the different? Is there a difference in how is the military and civilian practices? And
I could have him to the stage, and then I will take the next step, because basically I did what he did. I did everything that walked through the door. And it's like I would do one day. I remember the classic day was doing the cochlear implant in the morning, a tracheal resection in the afternoon, with the tonsil in between.
Yeah.
With tonsil in between.
Yeah. I mean, and that's one of the things that I love about my practice, is that I don't find that I need to find like my niche in pediatric ENT. And that's one of the things I love about pediatric ENT too, is that I still have the opportunity to have as diverse a practice as I want. I mean, one of the things that's nice about kind of in the military too, is that while my clinics are very busy and there's less of the kind of pressure for, well, we still have to like code and do all that. There's less of the pressure for billing and all that stuff too. So that's kind of the one thing that's nice. I don't ever have to get pre-approval for anything. I just sign patients up for surgery and they come and they have surgery, and that's all we have to worry about, right? So that's certainly a nice benefit to not having to have those interactions. And the running the residency is spectacular also. We do what's called a career development board with kind of senior officers, and I had one maybe a year or two ago, and the guy who I was working with, who was our like director of professional education, or kind of the DIO for our institution, and he's like, well, what else do you want to do in the Navy? And I was like, I don't think anything. Like I love being the program director, I love being the specialty leader, and those are like the only jobs that I really want to have, because being able to teach residents every day and kind of mold and manipulate their careers, and then see as they are finishing training and like going out to practice in the Navy. And then as a specialty leader, I get to help manage their careers after they've graduated as well. So that continuity is really nice. So I'm grateful for the jobs that I get to do in the Navy right now on a day-to-day basis. And then it also provides some like really unique opportunities too. I've spent a couple of like mini deployments on the hospital ship doing like cleft lips and palates. I was actually in charge of, this was kind of a very interesting experience, because I was in charge of a medical team that was not ENT based, that was part of the Pacific Partnership mission, but not with the hospital ship, the Mercy. And this was during COVID. So it was like very interesting to like go to the Philippines and try to manage this mission in the middle of COVID. And so just some like a very diverse set of experiences that I would not have had certainly if I wasn't in the Navy.
Yeah. So tell me about your transition.
So my transition. So it's really interesting. When I look back, I think So certainly I had a very diverse practice, like we mentioned, and which was great because I could, and the interesting thing was when I actually first got out, I was the only pediatric otolaryngologist in the Navy. So I spent 3 years of that. And then actually Tom Gallagher came and he was the other guy and he was on the East Coast, I was on the West Coast. So we had 3 years of overlap. But I think one of the things that really sort of came to it, I always knew that I really wanted to subspecialize airway and swallowing. And honestly, if you would ask me, for me, I guess it was a third or fourth year in medical school. I knew I wanted to do pediatric airway surgery. And I trained in Cincinnati as I went to medical school. So I walked out of there thinking that, ENT, everybody gets airway reconstructions. I didn't know what a septoplasty was. I was like, it just was like one of these things. And so I ended up, which was interesting. So, and in my fellowship, I did a ton of airway. I was very interested, but I also had a lot of research interest in swallowing and understanding. So during my time in the Navy, I built up a research program, and which was wonderful. And I was able to really kind of tease out a fair amount. But you can imagine, like, the patient population doesn't necessarily lend itself to, really being able to niche out and be able to really understand swallowing and airway. So I was spending a lot of time doing adults. I did adult swallowing and airway. I was doing a lot of pediatric, ears and things. So it was great. The strange thing is, you come out there and we haven't really touched on is you're kind of your only person. I talk about this now where I bring people into a big group, to a group of 10 of us, right? And it's like, so my junior attendings, they have the collective experience of, 9 other people to talk them through. I would be, we just kind of got to figure it out. And we have our mentors, we can make some phone calls and, the local people, but it's like, you kind of just got to grow. You take that sort of aspect, which makes you grow really quickly. And then you take the leadership experience that comes in. So one thing we haven't really touched on, like throughout, whether you go through civilian medical school, like all the Navy programs, there's a whole lot of leadership development. And like he says, the career development course, there's so much leadership that happens, like the training that comes through. And so when I took over as a residency program director, I was 6 months out of fellowship. At the time, it was the average years post-training to start the take over as a program director was 14 years. And I'm doing it 6 months. So I got to know, as part of that, I'm like on the phone calling people and everything and trying to figure this out. But I got to know sort of like this sort of mid-career sort of group of residency directors, because I was very involved in the academy. I was very involved on various different levels. So I got to know sort of my seniors who I'm acting as a peer to them, which gave me this like incredible ability to like understand sort of like a little further down the road than basically other people at sort of my stage of training. So I have other people who've gotten out of fellowship, and while they're figuring out how to run a practice or whatnot, I'm running a residency. Right. And so that's like very fulfilling at that young of an age to be doing it, but it's a lot to sort of figure out, right? So, which was really interesting though, because then it's like you take it. So I learned very early on how to sort of make a case for things, how to like be able to build, how to be able to ask, how to think about it, how to think about the system as a whole. And so whether you're in the military, whether you're in a civilian practice, whether you're part of a university, whether it's a private practice, it's so much more than just surgery, as we know. Yeah. And we learned that so early on. So for me, like I knew that, okay, I want to do airway surgery. Like I can do cochleums, I can do everything. And, fortunately, I was very well trained during it, so I can do all this stuff, but I know where my passion lies. And so that's when I realized that I'm going to have a finite amount of time that I can really like hone my craft within the Navy. And so I was sort of like planning along the way, how am I going to sort of set this stuff up? And so we sort of built a research catalog. We built a program kind of moving through. But then it really led to me coming out. And as I was coming out, I was actually a very unique asset, like as you might say, like going through like sort of the interview process and being recruited to civilian practice. Because here I was, fairly junior, with a bunch of leadership experience. And so it's like, well, gosh, where does that fit into the view of an academic program? I was pretty well published at the time because I had support within the Navy. I had actually got an MPH, which the Navy paid for my MPH, which was wonderful. And it was basically, during my fellowship, I had 2 years of civilian fellowship. The second year I did an MPH, and the Navy funded me to be out there, and I sort of negotiated some ways to get that taken care of. And so I was able to take all that, and then it kind of puts you out into the civilian world where it's like I was being recruited as somebody who would ultimately be a division chief, and That's kind of how that came together. I was able to use the leadership sort of skills I learned to be able to start building out more. And then in San Diego, so everyone in the Navy, when they finish their Navy career, it's hard to get us out of here. So, I don't know, it's a little bit of a joke, but the Navy Mafia does run medicine. And so there's, within even at that time, the senior leadership of the hospital that I'm at, 2 of the 4 people were prior Navy. And all across the city. So we've got our own little connections. So it's an amazing network that really has so I was able to build a program that had somebody else had tried to build an airway program in circa 2010 sort of time frame. If they would succeed where they had failed, we were able to build this airway program. It's everything I want it to be. It's huge. We have people coming from all around. We have a large team. But I really, credit the Navy to have given me the ability and opportunities to be able to do that.
Yeah, no, that's such a big point that you bring up, an important point that you bring up, because I was actually just talking to a friend of mine yesterday of how in medical education and as physicians, do we get enough education and training when it comes to leadership, right? We're supposed to, by the nature of what we do, expect it to be these leaders, and yet there's so much more involved. Whether it's, communicating as a leader, building a team as a leader, effectively running your OR, right? We do that every day, our clinics, how we talk to patients. And so based on your experience and now running the PEDS-ENT at Radies, how do you implement some of that, whether it's to your faculty, your MAs in clinic, to the OR, to the residents, to medical students? How do you kind of...
Yeah, it's so much of it is, having it's a team mentality. We're all in this together and we're going to get the job done. And I think that's very much a military thing. It's like, we have these resources. Here's the problem. We have no choice. This has to be solved. There is no in between. There's no, hey, it's quitting time. We're going home. There is no.
It's a no-fail mission.
Exactly. And we're used to constrained resources, and so we make do with what we got. We figure out the best way to do it, and by doing that, you learn what it is you truly need from a resourcing standpoint. So then you can actually make a case to say why you need it and show how you use things the best. I think that's, and I always talk about one of my former mentors always, was talking about stewardship, and leadership is really about stewardship and being able to say, how do I take care of these people? How do I steward the resources that I have, whether it be equipment, personnel, operating room time, whatever it may be, and even people's well-being? How do you balance that all? And I think since that was so ingrained in me from such an early point in my training and within the military career and spending the time, you get these opportunities very early on to, he was mentioning, going when they do the selections, they literally sit up in a board with the quote unquote most important people in the Navy. And as a young officer, you're talking to these people and you kind of see how sausage is made. And so you take that out. It's like at the end of the day, things all have to happen, and it takes the black box. And I really do seek to take the black box out of things. Now, of course, I'm going to have people in my team who they're totally fine with the black box. They want to know what they need to do, and it's incumbent upon me to recognize who those people are and how to who needs to know how the sausage is made, who wants to know how the sausage is made, and who doesn't care how the sausage is made.
Right. Well, as we start to round it out, any other final pearls or perhaps, other talking points that you'd like to share or get into?
I think that I've certainly, to echo what Matt had said, is that, I've been very grateful. There are certainly challenges associated with practicing in the military, as there are everywhere, but I've certainly been very grateful to the Navy for the opportunities that I've had. And I think that the probably the most important thing or the most lasting thing is the people that you get to work with and the networks that you create, right? So Matt alluded to kind of the Navy medicine mafia in San Diego, but it's great because it creates opportunities for my residents to rotate and train with other folks. My residents rotate with Matt still today, and they rotate at Kaiser with our colleagues that are there and at Scripps with our colleagues that are there. And so there's great opportunities to connect with people that are committed to both taking care of patients and taking care of each other. And that's, I think, something that is maybe unique to what you find in other places. One of the things that Matt also said is that knowing your resources and where you get in touch with people, I think is also really key. So, anybody that's interested in Navy ENT especially, please reach out to me. I'm happy to kind of be a mentor or help to facilitate that, because I think that it can be very challenging, especially if you're in an HPSP scholarship and there's only a handful of people and maybe you're the only person who's interested in ENT and so you don't know. But I love doing that. I love mentoring people through that process. And I think that, finding those people that can help you along the way and using the system that the Navy has can be really helpful.
Yeah. And just kind of, echo it all. It's so interesting. And I have the opportunity now where I have actually at any given time, I have residents from 3 different programs, including the Navy program. And it's just fun to see, as people go through and just see the different sort of personalities. I think the one thing, with it, always sort of people need to remember too is because there are people who have different experiences in the military, and there are people out there who have probably a lot of negative things to say. There's politics that play through it, but the beauty is I think we are all committed to a single mission of moving forward and making it better and I think that really plays through in terms of the quality of people who come through, people who sign up, people who raise their hands and join. I think it's so important, and it makes it such a great group, I think, as we look going forward. And so I think as I step back and just kind of look at it all, I'm, like I said, super grateful for the time, regardless of pendulum swinging one way or another, and realizing just like everything else in life, your Navy time is what you make of it. And you can absolutely, there are people who, opportunities are everywhere, but you always got to grab them, and nothing is given. Everything is earned, but that's life in general. And I think the most successful people in life, it's the same exact thing. And the military just provides a way for some of this to come in a faster sort of way.
Well, this has been a super inspiring conversation. I've learned a lot. If any of our audience wants to reach out to you guys, are you on any social media or you laugh. I wasn't sure. If not, they can reach out through Backtable.
I'll tell you an offline story about me and social media. But yeah, I'd say you're absolutely happy to chat with everyone. You're not going to find me on social media.
Yeah.
But
I think I have a LinkedIn profile.
Gopi knows where to find me.
I think I do that, but also certainly reach out.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much. I think it's a wrap.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, rate the podcast 5 stars, and share with a friend. If you have any questions or comments, direct message us at _Backtable ENT on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Backtable ENT is hosted by Gopi Shah
and Ashley Agan.
Our audio team is led by Kieran Gannon, with support from
Aaron Bowles,
Josh McWhirter,
and Josh Spencer.
Design and digital marketing led by Brian Schmitz, with support from
Taylor Spurgeon Hess.
Social media and PR by Chi Ding.
Administrative support provided by Judy Dela Cruz. Thanks again for listening, and see you next week.